Hello, beautiful mindset. It's another Wednesday. It's that time of the week where we bring you some awesome life sciences. You are here and we want to just expand your mind and we want to make sure that you learn extra. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is your boy, Knox. And of course, I'm not alone. I'm with our awesome resident teacher. Hello, Mr. Aslam.
Knox, how are you doing today?
I'm finding yourself.
How's the holidays?
It was quite okay. I went away and had some awesome fun.
Good. I was far away.
And
As you can see, my hair is gone.
Talking about matriculants, they never really had a holiday.
Not at all.
They had to spend all of it studying, revising, preparing for their June exams. So I just want to remind you guys at home that you can't afford to rest. You can't afford to waste a moment. Are we ready?
Ready to go. Mindsetters, hello. How are you? I'm hoping you had a bit of a holiday at least. Remember, I told you when we left, do some work and do some play as well. So you had a little bit of both. And this term is a compact term. If you really look at it, we've got a little bit of April and all of May, and that's it. The first week of June, your exam starts for June. So you've got to be very focused from the beginning. We're looking at today's lesson. We're talking about, we're continuing, remember we're carrying on from evolution that we started. We started with the early theories. We looked at natural selection and we ended there when we compared natural selection with artificial selection. We're moving on now to the next areas here, and we're looking at the similarities and the differences between natural and artificial. We've covered already. We are here at this point here, and that is talking about species, the definition of a species, what is speciation, what is allopatric speciation, what is sympatric speciation. Notice that allopatric / geographic isolation, they are similar terms, or rather different terms for the same concept. Okay. Then we move on to examples of reproductive isolation mechanisms. We want to look at the evidence. In other words, evolutionists or scientists have put forward this theory of evolution to us. When you put through a theory, you have to back up that theory with evidence. And this evidence has to be accepted by scientists globally. And so these pieces of evidence, and we will talk about evidence in more detail when we get there. We also want to revise, revisit, because it's still going to be part of your exams for this year. Although it's not in your syllabus for this year, but it is specified that you've got to go back to your grade 10, the fossil record, the grade 11, modification by descent. All these, by the way, are all evidence for evolution. Biogeography, you learned in grade 11. And obviously, we did together genetics not so long ago in grade 12. Those are the things that we need to look at. We also want to look at why organisms look different. They're saying they consider the differences in the appearance of organisms. Why? Why is that? And the lucky thing, guys, is when we're talking about the causes for variety, the causes for variation, is not something that we have to talk about again, because we've already spoken about it. All we're doing is we are now just highlighting to you in this section. But it does not mean you have to learn this as a new concept. What you learned about variation in meiosis still holds true in evolution. And this is why this paper 1 has been packaged this way, because everything is linked to each other. The DNA that we're learning talks about mutation. Mutation occurs when we're talking about meiosis. Mutation takes place in protein synthesis. Mutation has a bearing on evolution, how organisms change over time. The passing, the transfer of genes, the way the genes are transferred, the frequency of these genes, genetics, is also linked to evolution. And there we have all of those there, mutations, random mating, and fertilization there as well. Knox, you with me?
I'm definitely with you. I
Good.
just want to emphasize the fact that they always have to go back when dealing with, concepts in life sciences, because everything just piles up, especially when you get to grade 12. They always just have to go back
That's
and
right.
refresh their minds.
The good thing about it is the work that you're doing is packaged in grade 12. Get hold of the document that's called Exam Guideline 2011. It gives you the whole detail. It's only grade 12 work, apart from what we've mentioned here now that you've got to go back. But Knox is 100% correct. Because you can't talk about reproduction, you talk about ovary, you talk about sex cells when you don't know what a cell is.
True.
And that you learned in grade 10. So you've got to go back and forth all the time. Good. Coming back to our species concept, what is a species? And we spoke about this at the beginning of evolution when we defined a species. And here we have it here on the board, a group of organisms that share similar characteristics. One, first point. Secondly, they can interbreed. Okay? And lastly, to produce fertile offspring. Now we must understand this very closely. We're not talking about mating alone on its own. We're talking about interbreeding that leads to the production of offspring that can further reproduce. They can also reproduce. If, for example, we have two different species, a horse and a donkey, and these two have to mate. They are two different species. What's the offspring called? The offspring is called a mule. The mule itself cannot produce more offspring. So we say that the mule is infertile. So in that case, you can see that the horse and the donkey are not. They have interbred. They do look similar. So they have covered one, they have covered two. They have two of this important definition. They've met the requirements. But they did not meet the requirement of the last one. They must meet the all three requirements. That is why it is highlighted there. They share similar characteristics. They must look reasonably the same. They must be able to interbreed. And the offspring that come from there must also be able to breed thereafter. So that's what we need to look at. Okay. In speciation then, what is speciation? That's a species. Obviously then, speciation, it would be a process. What process? It's the process where new species are being formed. Speciation. Formation of new species. Two types that you have to concentrate on for this year. Allopatric, as we pointed out earlier, and sympatric. I'm not going to go into the details right here because we're going to deal with each one on its own as we go along.
Aslam?
Yes, sir.
I think I just have to quickly remind the mindsetters at home how to interact with us. Remember that you guys can go onto our Facebook page. That's www.facebook.com/learnextra. Or you can also visit us on Twitter. Our handle is @learnextra. Or you can send us an email if you want. Our email is helpdesk@learnextra.co.za, because I'm pretty sure that they already, have questions in their minds.
Definitely, guys. And look, what Knox has just told you is not new to you. If you've been watching all the time, you've already got this under the belt. But we need to remind you that you need to post those questions so that we can deal. What we have here is one thing, but your questions are more valuable to us because that means we are clarifying the misconceptions or the concerns that you have. We hope, by the way we present this, we deal with misconceptions in a general form. But you out there, you, and you, all of you, have one problem or the other. So everybody will have a different problem. You post that on the side, and you will help each other. If somebody knows the answer, post your answer there. You're helping somebody else. That's the spirit we want to see all the time. Here, guys, just an example of what happens here. As you can see, a species of snake. From there, in different environmental conditions, we got a wide variety of these snakes then evolving over time. What you must understand, speciation does not take place over an hour. Speciation does not take place over a day. Speciation does not take place over months. It takes over many, many, many years. Many generations have to go for this to happen. And when speciation takes place, another misconception that I must clarify today, speciation does not mean that a particular organism changes. Once you say that the organism changes, you are talking about which scientist? Lamarck, that's the one. You're talking about Lamarck, because Lamarck said if the organism wants to change, it changes within its lifetime, and it then passes it on. Law of use, using it all the time, gets better, and then it passes the same characteristic off to the offspring. Remember the giraffe story. So the minute you say that an organism changes, you are bordering on Lamarckism. We have to talk about a population that changes. And how does this population change? Simple, guys. The frequency of particular genes increase and the frequencies of other genes decrease. Now, what the hell am I talking about? There's a lot of words. Frequencies of genes change. We are saying that, let's say, for example, blue eyes, the gene that codes for blue eyes, there's 10% in this population. And the gene that codes for brown eyes, there's 90%. So the frequency of the brown eye gene is 90%, and the frequency of the blue eye gene is 10%. Now, this may change over time. And let's say after many generations in this area that we are talking about, it's not the same population, obviously, because it's several generations later. Now, all of a sudden, we check the population, and there's 60% of the blue-eyed offspring. So that's telling you that the number of offspring that carry this particular gene is more. So that's what we mean, frequency. How many times is it repeating itself, the frequency? So that's what we are talking about. I'm hoping you're with me, guys. Not you with me.
Definitely, yeah, all the way. There's a very, very important thing here. We have a viewer that is enjoying our show. Wonderful, right? But I think it's quite important for you guys to remember that even though you enjoy our show, you also have to use, all the other additional resources that we have for you. And how you can get hold of those is by visiting our website. That's www.mindset.co.za/learn/extra/live.
That's it. Now, you keep reminding them, and as they join us, as we're going along, we're going to get to the story there. So today, guys, I'm doing something slightly different from what we normally do. We're dealing with the concept. Remember, normally we do the whole concept thing, and then we go to the questions. Now, I found interesting 2 questions, the answers to which is the concept that we're discussing. And this is what you need to get used to. The more questions you tackle, the easier it will be for you to answer a question at the end of the year. Practice makes perfect. So we're starting the show today with this question. Describe how speciation occurs. By the way, it's adapted from March 2009, NSC question 2.3, paper 2. Notice, guys, remember, we are talking about paper 1 now. But this particular question, 2009, it was paper 2. Why? Because in the old version, up to 2010, the end of November 2010 or March 2011 actually, in the old version, what happened is evolution was in paper 2. And from November 2011, the newer version, which apparently we call now version 1, by the way, we call it version 1, the new version, the one that full-time learners will be writing at the end of the year. It is in paper 1. So just keep that in mind. So if you want to revise evolution and you want to go to the old papers, 2008, 9, 10, and March of 2011, then you will look for paper 2. Also remember, currently as we are writing, they are also writing version 2. That means those from the old syllabus are writing in November. So if you want to look at 2011, 2012, okay, and March 2013, if you want to look at those papers and you're looking for evolution, you look at paper 2. But if you look at version 1, you're looking at paper 1. Remember that all the time. It's important. So this one here says describe. The verb is describe. Whatever comes after describe is what you have to do. What must you do? Describe how speciation occurs when a population becomes separated by a geographical barrier. So one important thing that you have to talk about is speciation. But remember, I said there are 2 types of speciation. And this particular speciation is telling you when there's a geographical barrier. That is the clue in this question. Okay? There's a barrier. Now let's understand first in our minds what we are saying. There's a population. They're living on a land. Something happens and the land splits in 2. Now there's land, island, and sea in between. The sea, most of you don't see that water can be a barrier. When you're looking at a barrier, you're looking at something solid. Must be a rock, must be a building. But water is a barrier. What do we mean by a physical barrier? We mean there's something in between that's preventing the 2 populations from mating. This is what we mean by a barrier, a geographical barrier in this case. So the question wants you to explain that. And this, by the way, guys, is known as allopatric or geographical isolation, speciation. Now, what actually happens there? First of all, as we learned under natural selection, all populations has inherent in them variety. They don't look identical. They have genes, they are similar in looking, but they would. In our own populations, some have straight hair, some have curly hair, some have blue eyes, some have brown eyes. So that's what we are talking about. The population on its own has variety. When they are together, they can interbreed because they can mingle and they are within close proximity of each other. If this population is separated by a geographical barrier, as the question is saying, what will happen then? The population will split into two groups, obviously. That's the obvious. If it's split, that means one population is going to go one way, the other one is going to go the other way. And important now, they will not be able to interbreed. Notice I put in brackets their barrier. This wasn't in a memo. This was not in a memo. I put that in brackets because I will point out something later to you. And they will not be able to interbreed. What does that mean? They cannot interbreed. Why? Because there's a barrier there. Okay? There's a barrier there. They cannot interbreed. Now what happens? Each group now is exposed to different environmental conditions. One could be on one side of the mountain, which is south-facing, or east-facing. The other one could be west-facing. So we know the differences from our ecology in grade 10 of east and west and south and north, etc. And therefore undergoes natural selection independently. Independently, separately. Important words. Each group now, because they're undergoing natural selection on their own, separately, may become genotypically, genes, genotypically means the condition of their genes, and phenotypically different. Genotypically and phenotypically, but important, different. This is the important thing. They have become different. But the group, not an individual, the group, this population, understand that what I said in the beginning. And even if they were to be together, in other words, if the barrier is removed, they may not interbreed. Now notice, we spoke about not interbreed earlier. Now we're saying, again, not interbreed. So in this memo, we're giving you marks twice for not interbreed. That is why I said earlier, I wrote barrier here. So the first not interbreed is linked to this barrier story. The second interbreed is even if we take away this barrier, they still can't interbreed. Why? Because they become reproductively isolated. Aye. Undo. Do. Good. Sorry about that.
Aslam,
Yes,
well,
sir.
there's a question here. Shikash would like to know if he's right by saying that Lamarck had two laws.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
But he would get no marks for that.
So you have to tell us what the laws are.
Got to name the laws. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Unless, of course, the question was, how many laws did Lamarck have?
True.
Which
It's
I don't
unlikely.
think any examiner is going to ask.
Yeah.
He had two laws, yes.
True.
And just to
True.
remind Shikash, you said,
Yeah.
it's the law of use and disuse, and the law of inheritance of acquired or modified characteristics. We'll talk about that later, maybe. Okay, so we here now again, leading to the formation of a new species. This is known as allopatric speciation. Now we can go back up. There we have the whole story there. The population had variety. When they were together, they could interbreed. That means they were in one area, they could interbreed. Now what happens? There's a physical barrier. They've been separated. This could be a mountain. This could be a river, whatever. Then what happens? The population splits into two separate groups. Now what happens? Each group is exposed to different, because the environment is different. And because of that, each undergoes natural selections on its own, independently. Because of this, they may become genotypically and phenotypically different. So different that even if they were put together, they may not interbreed or they become reproductively isolated. In other words, when they get together, maybe their breeding seasons have changed. The one's breeding in summer, the other one is breeding in winter. Maybe the mating calls have changed, etc. Whatever, we'll talk about that also later. Leading to the formation of a new species. This is known as allopatric speciation. That is a mouthful you guys have had. I've gone through an important concept, allopatric speciation. I think you've earned yourself a little break.
So thank you very much, guys, for joining us. Make sure that you join us after this break. Take a break, take a breather, walk outside, drink water. See you after this. Welcome back from the Ed Break Grade 12s. I hope that you guys are ready to continue with life sciences. One of the most important things that Aslam talked about during the break is knowing what fits where. So today we're doing paper 1. You guys have to know which topic fits into which paper so that as you study, you are able to prepare yourself in the right way. Again, remember that if you want to ask us any question, please go onto Facebook. That's www.facebook.com/LearnExtra, or ask us questions on Twitter at LearnExtra. Or if you want, you can also talk to us via email, and our email address is helpdesk@learnextra.co.za. Aslam?
Thanks, Knox. There you go, guys. Post those questions. We're waiting for your questions as well. Now, just to give you an idea, now we've spoken about allopatric speciation. Here's an example of these squirrels. These squirrels were on either side of the Grand Canyon. So in other words, scientists are saying that before the Grand Canyon formed, in other words, before the landmass split, the squirrels were probably together. Now look at the diagram that you're seeing there. Sorry about that. Where did I do? Okay, next page. There we go. Good. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're looking at this diagram here and this diagram here. So these guys are relatives. You can see they are relatives, right? Okay, but they're not of the same species. What happened? They were probably together, not they, but their ancestors were probably on the landmass together and the landmass split. So they were exposed to different environmental conditions on either side of the Grand Canyon. Can you see how we're fitting the same thing we explained earlier now in an example? What happens then? They undergo natural selection independently, and therefore they would show genotypical and phenotypical differences. And even if we put them together, they may not recognize. Sometimes they become so different that they do not recognize that they are of the same species, so they do not mate. That's one way. Other than that is that their mating seasons may have changed. Mating habits may have changed. So much so sometimes that even that the sexual organs may have evolved to such an extent that they would not fit into each other. So those are some of the reasons that will be put forward. And just to give you an idea of some of the barriers that we are talking about, there you have your snow-capped mountains. There's water as a barrier. There's an island on this side, island on that side, etc. And let's look at the one from the textbook. This one here talks about the famous islands that Darwin studied, the Galapagos Islands. All the idea is they were all part of the mainland in South America initially. There's the South America there. There's these islands here. The theory is that they were part of the mainland and they broke away, and therefore you have now enlarged those islands enlarged, and we're having them there. So in other words, the organisms that were originally all together, because of this they split, they could not interbreed. There's a barrier, and the barrier is the water. There's the water there. There's the water there. All of this here is water, 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 that way there. So the islands are separated by water. It's a physical barrier. Allopatric speciation will take place. So we're not just talking about things in the air now. I'm showing you the pictures as well so that you can follow what we're saying. And the most famous of the speciation, where Darwin got his theory from, is from the finches, the birds that were living or inhabiting the islands. You notice that their beaks are different. And their beaks are different because they probably eat different foods. in the different islands, there may have been different food, and because of that, those that had this type of beet, for example, to crack nuts, etc., they would survive. Natural selection. In that island, this one was stronger, so it survived. In another island, that one didn't survive, but this one survived, and so on and so on. So the different beaks are for the different food that is available on the island. I'm hoping we've round up allopatric speciation, and we go again to a question.
But before the question, Aslam,
Yes.
I just want to really emphasize to the matriculants that when the study was done, right, on natural selection and what you just talked about, the study was basically done using the pigeons on the Galapagos Islands, right?
Finches,
But finches, rather. But when you answer your question, remember that they can bring any other type of species. They might bring in your giraffe, they might bring in your tortoise. All that you have to know is that you still have to apply the same principle from the finches in your, other different type of animal that has been given to you.
Absolutely, Knox, absolutely. You've got to be able to, as I've been saying over and over time, you've got to adapt what you are doing, and you've got to get your act together in terms of understanding there's new information, fit it with the old information that you have. Good, there we go. Describe how sympatric speciation occurs. Arrow again. Now watch, I want you people to note as we are going along with this, how similar the answer is. Right? I want you to note that. Let's go down. We start off there. There is variation in the population. That obviously has to go away. Let's just take that out. There is, hey, that looks like a little clown that I see there. Wow.
I like it, though.
I'm getting good, eh? Ghostbusters. Okay. There we go. So notice again, whether it's sympatric, whether it's allopathic, the first sentence that you're going to say is that there's variation in the population. What happened there? I pressed something. Okay. Now, watch this. This is highlighted now. I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Okay. That is highlighted. Population occupies the same area. Oops. This arrow is going to drive me insane today. Okay. The population occupies the same area. Why? Sympatric implies that there's no physical barrier. That is why. So in sympatric, they are in the same area and speciation occurs. So there's nothing physically stopping them from mating with each other. This is what we mean. So you have to say that here. This is, in this particular memo, there was an asterisk put here as well. This was a compulsory mark. Over and above, whether it was 7 marks or what, if I can remember, there were 2 marks that were compulsory. This first one here, and the second one there, arrow. There we go. I am pressing something. They may separate into different groups, different niches, due to difference in behavioral patterns, feeding habits, or due to polyploidy. Now understand what we are saying here. These 2 points are compulsory because this is what makes sympatric speciation different from allopatric. One is that there's no barrier. You have to mention that. And secondly, then what causes them to separate then? So you're explaining there is no barrier, but they do separate into different areas, much like how you would do on a playground. You go to school and it's now break, and some of you will prefer to sit near the tuck shop. Others will prefer to sit nearer the toilets. Others may prefer to sit behind the buildings for what? God alone knows. But each one got their own niche, you want to call it, their own spot, our spot. This is our spot. So in the same way, these organisms, they separate into these different niches because of their behavior patterns or their feeding habits or because of polyploidy. Arrow, good. Again, now watch what happens. Something is going on here. Each group undergoes natural selection independently. Did we talk about that before? Yes, we did. So we started the same. We said something in the earlier one, we said there was a geographical barrier. We've taken that out now, and we've replaced it with there's no geographical barrier, and we explained how they separated, why they separated here, etc. Now, what? It goes back to what we originally had. Each group undergoes natural selection independently and develops differently. There's a lot of P's that have come in between there. Just ignore the P's for now. And they become differently, genotypically and in other words, what we can say, that they became genotypically and phenotypically different. That's what we are saying there. Now, notice we're using another word here, gene flow. Gene flow or reproduction between the different populations does not occur. In other words, what we are saying is no interbreeding. I deliberately left the gene flow there so that you know when you see, when they talk of gene flow and no gene flow, it's the same as saying interbreed and no interbreed. When we're saying gene flow, that means that genes are flowing between these organisms. That means they are mating and therefore they can exchange genes. So that's what gene flow means, okay? So understand that. The differences that develop now between the different populations prevent them from interbreeding even if they were to mix after. In other words, they came from this spot, they came. Obviously, if the organism wants to go from this side of the lake to that side of the lake, it may have to cross other zones. He's not going to go always right round in a fringe. He probably go through. But they have become so different that they don't recognize that they're of the same species originally, and therefore they will not interbreed. And why? Again, because of reproductive isolation that we talked about. And that's good that we came to that because we're going to get to that section now. But what I want you to understand, mindsetters, that look at that question. This question, when they gave it to them in 2011, I think, when they gave them this question, the learners were stunned. Yet, all the other years, they asked allopatric speciation. Now, you look at this one, if there were 7 marks, and if there were 2 marks that were compulsory. So even if you wrote allopatric speciation, if you wrote the other parts, at least you would have got that mark. I'm not saying you must do that in an exam, please. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But what I'm telling you is, why must you learn 2 things? Here's allopatric speciation, here's sympatric speciation. Why must you learn these sentences twice? You've learned it once, keep it there. Whatever speciation takes place, this has to follow. And your first point, there is variation. The only difference is there a barrier? Yes, allopatric. Is there a barrier? No, sympatric. So you're going to explain that. So get that in your head. There is not 2 different concepts. It's the same concept, but we're talking about whether it happens because of a barrier or not. That's all we want to know there. Okay, good. What were the key words when you are discussing? Remember when you did natural selection, I told you there are certain key words. They were many offspring, variety, competition, survival of the fittest, natural selection. Those 5 words must give you 5 sentences to explain natural selection. Now, what about speciation? Look at this. First of all, population together can interbreed. That's your first point. There's variety. You can even put that either way. It doesn't make a difference. Separate the population. Separate is your key word. Either by a physical barrier, then it's allopatric, or no barrier, then it's sympatric. Simple. Next one, environment may differ. If they get separated, the environment in one area is different from another one. The key word being different. Why? Because that leads to the next point. That because it's different, natural selection will take place independently. And because natural selection takes place independently, genotypically and phenotypically, they will become different. And because that happens, they change over several generations, and this gives us a new species over time. And how do we know they're new species, that they're not the same species anymore? They cannot interbreed. So we have to add that. I would add that in. I must have forgotten to write that in there. Cannot interbreed. Now you notice that cannot interbreed, there's 2 marks for it. Yes, Knox.
Okay, so there's a question here, right,
yes,
from Silo. So Silo wants to know if speciation is like the use of, is like the law of use and disuse for Lamarck.
Not at all.
Okay.
Please, Silo, speciation is a Darwinian concept, not a Lamarckian concept. Okay? When we're talking about Lamarck said that the organism itself changes. Speciation is saying that the population changes over time, over several generations. It's a big difference from what Lamarck was saying. Lamarck saying, now, here, I want to be tall, I stretch, I become tall, and therefore all my children will be tall because I have become tall. That was Lamarck was saying. And that is one of the reasons why Lamarck's theories are rejected by scientists, because we cannot become something because just we wanted to become. Yes, in the terms of studies, I always go back to that one. It doesn't mean that I want to do better, I can study and do better. I'm failing. Now I want to do better, I can study. That's different. It's not a characteristic. All right? That's an acquired thing in your body. But it doesn't mean now if you've learned this biology, you've learned speciation. Now you have a child. Your child will come out speaking. You know what is speciation? Is allopathic speciation. Your child won't say those things there. Okay? So understand that. Cello, please. I'm great. And don't feel bad that you've asked that question. It's important that you've asked that question, because just like you, there may be thousands of other learners that have the same misconception. And when you ask this question, you're helping us to get rid of the misconception. All right. Just to give you the examples now of the sympatric speciation, and a classic example is the one in Lake Malawi, the different cyclids, some say cichlids, whatever, cyclids I would say. Over this area, this is what happens. Now watch what happens here. Here's the lake. Here's the whole of the lake. And look at the different one, Bamba, and you get different types of these fish all over the show here. They have different niches. So no barrier. They're all in the same lake. But they have separated because of behavioral or dietary needs. And because of that, they did not interbreed, and they may have become genotypically and phenotypically different because of natural selection, and therefore we have that story there. And with that, guys, we have covered another concept. Remember, we've done one concept, sympatric. Now we have covered, one allopatric, sympatric. We're taking another break.
Sure. Quickly, guys, I want you to remember that when working around concepts, you need to be able to explain all of them. So a quick exercise for you when you're at home during your free time, write all the important concepts and then test yourself and see how much you can expand from all those concepts. Just write everything that you know, for an example, about speciation, and then after that compare with the textbook. But for now, let's take an ad break. We will be back after this. Stay with us. Welcome back from the break, matriculants. I hope that you guys are ready and excited again as we continue with some life sciences. Now, recently you'll remember that we ran a book competition, right? And today we are going to be awarding the prize. So here with me are the names. And what Aslam is going to do is that he's going to pick out one name. And that person will be the person to walk away with the book prize. Aslam.
I have a good feeling about this.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
May just be me. There you go.
And the winner of the book is Franz from Emalahleni. Now, which book will Franz get?
Oh, you mean there's another draw?
Yes, another draw.
Franz, you better keep your fingers crossed.
Boom. Okay, so let's see which book Franz is going to get. So he's going to get Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. Congratulations, Franz, and I hope that you enjoy your prize. Remember that if you want to ask us any questions, you can go onto our Facebook page. That's www.facebook.com. It's www.facebook.com/learnextra.
That's the first one, eh?
That's just the first one. So we love our mindset. We just want to give.
Giving out, guys.
Just
giving out
everything.
Giving out.
Okay, let's go. Boom. Okay, who is the second winner? This is Tsecho from Pretoria Girls. So, which book will you get?
Tsecho, let's see what book we can pull for you.
Kaboom. She is going to get the book by Nelson Mandela, Conversations with Myself.
Wow.
Congratulations, guys, and I hope that you enjoy all your prizes. Once more, I just want to say thank you very much to Macmillan for sponsoring today's show. This show will not have happened without you. All the mindsetters in South Africa just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Aslam?
Thanks, Knox. Let's move on, guys. We're moving towards the end. how do we create these new species that we are talking about? And I said I'm going to come back to reproductive isolation. There we go, there's your reproductive isolation. It could be either because of a geographical isolation, barriers, as we spoke about. I'm not going to go into the details there. Or a temporal isolation, temporal by separated by time, temporal by time. That means some organisms move around at night, nocturnal, some during the day, diurnal, some or by months or by years, different seasons, etc. All of that will come under that. Or behavioral isolation. In other words, they're separated by behaviors like mating calls. Mating calls may be different. Their physical traits, that means the organs that they use for reproduction are different. Or their mating dances, their behavior, their way in which they attract mates may differ, and because of that they become isolated. If it's different, they isolated means they cannot get together. So this is what we mean when we talk about reproductive isolating mechanisms. We move on to evidence provided by scientists for evolution. And guys, most of this is revision because you have done it before. So I'm going to run through this quickly and then we will tackle the questions. The first one there, special area of interest, is the paleontology. That is the study of fossils. Remember, paleontology, the study of something, or of fossils here. Logy always means the study of something. When you say logist, paleontologist, that means that's the person who studies the fossils. So be careful. If it's asked in a terminology, you may be penalized if you give the wrong answer there. And as we know, what a fossil is a trace of an organism that was living at a certain time. What's so good about this paleontology? First of all, the fossils that are found there show a sequence of events that happened in Earth, according to scientists. Further, fossils show some degree of development over time, from very primitive to more the modern and more complicated or complex. And fossils provide evidence, obviously, of life forms that existed in the past and may be extinct now. There are two types of dating. How do we know how old a fossil is? You've done this in grade 10. Like I said, I'm just running through. One is relative, and the other one is absolute or radiocarbon dating. Relative meaning according to its position in the rock. The lower down it is, the older it is. It's just something like if you are collecting magazines. If you read January's magazine, you put it on the floor. February, you read the magazine, you put that on top of the January one, and so on and so on. And if you stack them, that one, January is right at the bottom, December will be right on top. So the oldest one will be at the bottom. That's relative. So we can't be accurate with that one. We are judging more or less. If it's in this area, this one was so old, so that's why it should be that age. But absolute means you've got to be more accurate. How? By radiocarbon dating. In other words, we look at the elements inside and how they decay over time, and we then date it according to that. In other words, how much there was originally, how much there is left, and what is the rate of decay of that particular element, in this case, carbon. Good. The next evidence we talk about is anatomy. And here we talk about homologous structures. And if you look at this example, it explains it very nicely. These are all different organisms. The four limbs of these mammals in different orders, they all come from different orders. They have skeletons that consist of similar bones. In other words, the plan is the same as we go along. This suggests, according to evolutionists and scientists that believe in evolution, that they had a common ancestor. Why would they have the same plan? If you look at the colors, you see the plan there, and you've done this in grade 11. And like I said, similarities between the structures show definite relationships between these organisms, which is of a common ancestry. The next one is analogous. Now, here again, terminology. Remember, homologous. When we talk about homologous chromosomes, they are chromosomes, or one of maternal, one of paternal, coding for the same characteristics. So don't confuse that with homologous structures. Homologous structures are structures that look similar and are thought to be of common ancestry. Analogous, now you look at, in this case here, they are different structures and they have different patterns, and because of that, they will take on a different form. For example, if you take the wing of an insect and the wing of a bat, There's your wing of a bat. See, it's made up of bones. But the wing of an insect is made up of membranes. They have a different structure as such, but they have the same function. In this, scientists say, because they look different in this case, because they are of different origin. They do not share the same ancestor. So homologous share the same ancestor. Analogous, they do not share the same ancestor. And we move on. Last one here is vestigial structures. And I'm using the human ones because it'll make more sense to you. You notice our ears, we have muscles that can turn the ear in different directions, but we do not use them. So scientists are saying, why do we have those muscles there then? And they're saying we have it because along the evolution pathway, our ancestors had it, so therefore, this is proof that we came from a common ancestor. Also, your wisdom teeth. Why is it there? They just give you a problem, the wisdom teeth. Okay, that's a problem. Well, it's not a problem, but that's evidence again. Appendix, the one that you don't even know exists until it starts troubling you. Okay, scientists say they do not know, they do not clearly understand the function of it. So why do we have it? Because the other organisms had it, and therefore common ancestry. And the last one is this coccygeal, or the coccyx, the last few fused vertebrae on the vertebral column. Also, that comes from the tail of other vertebrates, animal, and therefore they're saying we have this because that's a reminder of our common ancestry. Biogeography shows that species distributed can be explained by evolution. How? Those that live in a similar content, on the same content, show more similarities than those that are on other contents. So the closer the organisms are, the closer relatedness they show. Unless, of course, if we take evolution and we remember that Pangaea, one landmass, if they were originally together, according to the landmass, and when it got split, there will still be similarities between organisms in different contents because of this. This is what evolutionists are saying. And lastly, molecular biology and genetics. Evolutionists are saying, scientists are saying that all organisms have the same identical DNA. That means DNA has phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base, double-stranded, double helix. All organisms, whether you plant, animal, whatever, they all have that. So therefore, must have been a common ancestor. They also say that they have similar sequence of genes. The genes are in a similar sequence. They also say that there are parts of the DNA which do not make sense, or they do not have any function. All organisms have that. Protein synthesis, whether it's taking place in a bird, whether it's taking place in your body, the way protein synthesis proceeds is the same, it's identical. Also, other respiratory and other metabolic pathways that take place, similar in all organisms. Therefore, they're saying this points out that evolution has taken place and that we have a common ancestor. Remember, the basic premise of evolution is that all organisms have a common ancestor. So whatever evidence they use must go back to say this shows that there's a common ancestor. You'll notice in every bit of evidence that I spoke about, we go back to common ancestry. Now, what causes variation? And I told you this at the beginning of the show, that this is not new. What causes variation? Meiosis. How? Crossing over during prophase 1 brings about variety, exchange of genetic material. Also, the random assortment of chromosomes brings about variety. You've done this already in meiosis, so it's not new. Mutation, any change in the gene or in a chromosome brings about a change. Random mating, there's mating is not fixed, so that this organism is going to mate with that one and so on. So it's random, so there's exchange of gametes there. And random fertilization, there's no guarantee which particular sperm will fuse which particular eggs. Mindset is, that brings us to the end of our work itself. I just want to get to this question very quickly. It says there, diagrams 1, 2, and 3 show the sequence of events that have taken place over thousands of years. Here's the organisms there. A landslide takes place. They get separated, and no gene flow there. You saw gene flow, no gene flow. Name the evolutionary process represented by the sequence of the events. Remember what Knox said earlier? They can give you another example. Here's it here. And what's this process? Speciation. And the next question will obviously ask you to explain this process. How do we explain it? Variety. Can inbreed when they're together. Division because of the barrier. They separate. The climatic conditions may be different. They depend independent natural selection, genotypically, phenotypically different. When they get back together, they are so different that they do not recognize they are of the same species. They may not breed with each other, interbreed, and therefore we say that they have evolved into new species. Would that, Knox?
Sure, wonderful. We have one interesting question quickly.
Yes.
It's so important. The question is, how can we explain the resistance of the HIV virus as a result of evolution?
Wow. The resistance of HIV virus or any virus. What has happened? When we are, let's take it general in viruses. We look at TB as one extremely drug-resistant TB, for example, and HIV as well. Remember, the HIV virus has the ability to change its DNA code. Now, when we use medication against it, there are some that are susceptible to that medication. They will die. Those viruses, or well, not the virus, we can't die with the medicine there in that case. But if we destroy them, then those ones get destroyed, but the others are resistant, so they survive. So what has happened? What are we talking about? How is it linked? Natural selection. Any other questions there?
Okay, there's another question, and Shikash again would like to know, what is artificial selection?
Great. Shikash, you said.
Yeah.
Shikash, artificial. Look at the word, artificial selection. Natural selection, nature selects the best individuals. Artificial selection, artificial means it's not from nature, we're doing it. So the humans look at specific traits in organism that they want to perpetuate, like horses that have good, strong muscles that can run fast. So they take the one that has the trait and try to breed that one with another one that shows the same trait, and in that way, they're selecting that particular trait. So it's not necessarily the best, it's what the human thinks is best at the time. Whereas in natural selection, the one that nature selects is the best at that time. Here we are assuming, and not for the animal's sake, for our sake. We want better fruit, so we select the best crop and we pollinate them and we get that. Artificial selection means we interfere, we select certain genes and we can move on that way.
Okay, one last question again.
Good.
Or rather, just you to comment on, how should mindsetters look at artificial selection in terms of the debate around artificial selection, the morals, the ethics, because it's always there.
They like to ask the question, arguments for, arguments against. You must be able to argue on both sides. Again, do not restrict your answer to one thing. Don't say it's against nature. God says in the Bible it's wrong, and it's immoral. Those 3 points are all pointing to one thing, and that is moral, religion, etc. You only get 1 mark. You must look at other disadvantages. For example, we don't know the long-term effects of artificial selection. We don't know what it's going to do to the organism. We don't know the ecological effects long-term, and other disadvantages. Advantages you can look at, that you can get more money out of it, you can get more food, etc., etc., etc. But argue your point. If they ask you to argue, debate it, then you must take one point or the other. But if they say arguments for, you just go with those. If you say arguments against, you go. Remember, advantages, disadvantages, arguments for, arguments against. Those are the type of questions. That's how you do it. Remember, that's LO3 at the moment in your syllabus. Over to you, Knox. I think we've come to the end of our
Okay, so
setup.
guys, quick tip, right? When working around such concepts, you need to go back to old question papers, sort of look at the pattern, look at the structure, look at the types of questions that they answer, right? In order for you to get a very, very good idea of how the exam will be. Last time, again, we just want to say thank you very much to Macmillan for sponsoring today's show. This show would not have happened without you. From myself, Aslam, and the Mindset crew, see you soon.
Keep well.